Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Reading Corner. Today, we're going to be talking about all the books that I read this summer, but instead of just talking about them and giving you my thoughts and opinions on them, we're going to be looking at one-star reviews of every book I read. To protect everybody's privacy and their own opinions, I'm going to keep their names out of it and just read the reviews. The first book I read this summer was The Duchess Deal by Tessa Dare, and the overall feeling was that this book was either boring or ridiculous, but one review stuck out to me, and they said, "I'm so disappointed. One of my favorite books ever is by Tessa Dare. Any Duchess will do." So I was so excited to then read this new story, The Duchess Deal. It had so many good things for it. The deal itself that I read on the back of the book sounded cute, marriage of convenience to get in there and then ship the wife off to a country only to accidentally fall in love along the way. Would have been perfect. The scarred, monstrous-looking hero is what ruined it for me, I think. I never found him to be grumpy at all. Maybe he roared at the heroine when he caught her spying on him in his room, but other than that, he read to me like a normal HR guy, which was okay itself. He came across as a likable fellow, just not consistent with what the narration kept trying to describe to me along the way. He was supposedly grumpy and lonely because all his friends dumped him when he came back from war with disfiguring scars. He constantly complained, inner dialogue, to himself and refused to believe his wife really liked or desired him when she gave him nothing but positive signals and was a sweetheart to him. But yet he would go on nightly strolls through Mayfair and scare hooligans on purpose. It was preposterous and got old. The cute rules of the deal were mentioned once in the beginning, but kind of fell on the side rather quickly. The addition of the feral cat that the heroine brought to the household was ridiculous. Now the heroine arrived wearing the wedding dress in the beginning was eye-roll worthy. I'm not a stickler for all the historical correctness, but sometimes it's so absurd they can't possibly imagine their actions ever taking place in that time period, and I feel embarrassed for the characters instead of relating and falling in love with them. Lastly, I felt the book was somehow rushed from scene to scene, and I wasn't able to connect with anything happening, as I was being told that it happened instead of reading what was happening. This review stuck out to me because I had the opposite feelings and reactions while reading the story, and I did find him grumpy because in the time period that it's set in, looks mattered as well as your station and title in life. And so for him to come back to the war and have a disfiguration because of the scars on his face made sense, and the way that the society treated him also made sense. And so for him to be grumpy and lean into this persona made sense to me. And because society cast him out, it would also make sense to me as to why he wouldn't believe that his wife cared about him, even though she was giving him positive signals, because he's used to people outcasting him and saying bad things about him and not liking him. And so for one person to change that, that's something that is hard to adjust to sometimes. So everything that this character did made sense to me. Now, I will agree that some of the things that the main character did were kind of ridiculous, like showing up in the wedding dress. Like, seriously, I don't know why you couldn't just carry it, but it didn't bother me that much. I wasn't bothered by the historical accuracy or lack thereof, according to some people. And I don't know if that's because I didn't go in with a mindset that it was a historical romance. It just didn't bother me that much. I fully went into it expecting a romance, and that's what I got out of it. And overall, I enjoyed it. The next book I read was the second book in the series called The Governess Game. The overall reviews were that this book was not believable, not Regency appropriate, or boring. And one review going under the not Regency period said, "I stopped reading in the middle of the book. Language and behavior were not Regency, but today's English and manners. Especially her behavior was strange. Which working young orphaned woman of the time would seduce a nobleman just to satisfy her curiosity in regards to sex? None, as the pregnancy would have ruined her and the rich nobleman, not a meal ticket as it were today." This one stood out to me because I don't remember her seducing him just for the curiosity of sex. I remember her seducing him and him being madly in love or whatever, but I don't remember it purposely being for the object of sex. So that was really interesting to me. I know that some of the things that happened in the story would never happen in real life. The main fact being that a duke would never fall for a governess. And if he did, he wouldn't ever marry her. But I know that it's a story. And so I was okay with the premise of the story, and I thought it was a cute romance. This next review falls into the category of not believable. The reviewer said, "This is funny and fun. I wanted something more complex and more believable. The heroine seems way too amazing with her ship sailing, Portuguese bartering, clock fixing, astronomical star finding, world traveling, but poor and unrefinedness. The writing just had me rolling my eyes. I'm not the audience here. Definitely can understand others enjoying this, though." I can appreciate this review because it's talking about their feelings and how they felt reading the story, but also acknowledging why others would like the story. The third book I read was none other than Archer's Voice by Mia Sheraton. Now, you all know that I love this book. I recently did a video with my favorite quotes and scenes from the story, but having to read 1-star reviews of this book was both really uncomfortable and funny to me. And the overall feeling was that it was insta-lovey, love fixes everything trope. They also had a problem with the club scene and easy forgiveness. I'm confused. Instant love? No. It was definitely instant attraction, but there is a difference between instant love and instant attraction. And this book definitely leaned on instant attraction rather than instant love. They did not start doing anything romantic until halfway through the book. So I don't know where the instant love thing is coming from, but there was definitely instant attraction. I'm also confused by the love fixes everything trope because even when they started to have feelings romantically and admit them, they still had things to work through. We still had to talk about Bree's trauma and why she was running away from her hometown. And then we also had to talk about Archer's insecurities and help him through those. And so I'm really confused as to the love fixes all. Yes, love helped that, but there was also the friendship and having to work through them still. To me, the love fixes all trope is, oh, I'm suddenly in love and everything's better. And that is not what I got from this book at all. Lastly, the club scene that we're talking about, as well as the easy forgiveness that comes after. I mean, I had a problem with the club scene, and I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. It was just like next level uncomfortable, secondhand embarrassment, all the things. It actually reminded me of a scene in the Earth's Children series by Jane M. All in the 5th book, where I had the same experience because it was one of the characters saying, I'm going to help you fit into society, and then purposely embarrassing them. So I was totally uncomfortable with the scene anyway. The thing that I had a hard time understanding was the instant forgiveness or easy forgiveness that people thought happened after the club scene, because I would have been more frustrated as the reader if Bree hadn't forgiven him when she did, because her whole frustration and hurt and sadness, which are all valid, came from a misunderstanding and something that she thought he did on purpose when it was a setup by his cousin slash brother Travis. And so if this had dragged on and she hadn't forgiven him when she did, I would have been really, really frustrated. This wasn't his fault. And, some reviews say that it was. My understanding of the way that this was written was that Travis set him up, and because he wasn't used to being part of society and wasn't used to any of these things, he was very easily led into this. And it was not his fault at all. And I do agree that, we shouldn't baby them or anything like that. But there is some guiding and coaching that needed to happen, which Bree did, and Travis did not. So it makes sense that Archer would make this mistake in the club because he didn't know what was going on. And also, there was a sense of, I want to prove that I can do this. And so he was going to do anything that Travis encouraged him to do because he wanted to fit in. He wanted to be part of that crowd. And he also wanted to prove to himself that he could do this. And as he said, he also wanted to prove to Bree that he could do this and be part of society. The review I pulled for this said, "Am I missing something? Am I reading a different book? How do people like this book? Listen, I have hard advice. Maybe I don't deserve a romance ever, whether in a book form or in real life. But I felt absolutely nothing reading this. Possibly some rage, but that's it. But this time, I know it's because this book was genuinely so bad, not because I'm a picky asshole when it comes to romance. My head is literally empty. I don't know what to think of this because of how bad it was. I have no thoughts. I have literally lost my ability to think. I do not think, therefore I am not. How does this have a 4.4 rating? How? As with my other one-star reviews, I'm going to put my reviews in bullet points. Spoilers ahead. But read it, because you don't want to read this book anyway. Well, I'm sorry, but for someone who apparently has no thoughts, you said a lot. First one. Insta love is strong here. Bree sees Archer and is almost immediately love. The silent, brooding town outcast? Why not? Because as soon as you see a hot, mysterious guy, you have to fall in love, right? Again, referring back to the instant love versus instant attraction, there was definitely instant attraction, but not instant love. Speaking of badly written things, the two characters were so two-dimensional, it hurts. This girl saw her dad shot and was almost raped at gunpoint, and then her PTSD magically gets cured just by sleeping next to the hot guy she met a month ago. What the absolute fuck? How did this author write anything and go, yes, totally fine? I'm so confused by this bullet point that I can't even find words. The thing that he's referring to, yes, it did happen, but it was not an instant cure, and she also did not sleep next to him and then suddenly wake up fine. She's been dealing with this PTSD for months, and she had a triggering event happen, and then she finally told Archer about it, which let it get off of her chest and then make her feel better. I'm confused by that whole bullet point. Moving on. My sweet mute boy. What? Did I read that correctly? Is that supposed to be romantic? Just so cringy. I got secondhand embarrassment every time she called him, like, my mute boy or my kind silent man. Literally cannot take this seriously. I thought it was fine, but okay. There are great romances that have some sort of tragedy as a background. This is not it. She is weirdly romanticizing Bree's PTSD and Archer's disability in a way that feels so slimy and icky, it made me uncomfortable reading it. As a person with a disability, I thought this book was extremely well done, and I talked about it in my favorite quotes and scenes for this book, that this book addressed many of the problems that I have talked to people about and that we have faced in the disability community or continue to face. And so for me, this book was really, really well done because it did address those issues. Now, I am not a spokesperson for people in the disability community, and so I cannot speak to everyone's experience with this book if they read it. However, my take on it was that it did a good job talking about problems that are faced within the disability community all the time. And for that reason, I loved this book because it addressed those problems. It brought them up, had Archer go through them. I loved that this book brought awareness to those problems. Now, some people might not agree with me, and that's okay. This is just my take on it. Now, I can't speak to the PTSD part because I've never had PTSD, and therefore I can't talk about it with any knowledge. The next bullet point has to do with the club scene. It says, the club scene. Holy shit. What even was that? Don't even have to elaborate. It was the worst. Also, Bree forgave him so easily. Babe, grow a spine. I talked about this when I introduced the book because this was something that I saw a lot, was the club scene and then also the apparently easy forgiveness that came afterwards. I wouldn't call it easy. She didn't forgive him right away. And also, I would have been frustrated, like I said earlier, if she hadn't, because it wasn't his fault. This was completely on the fact that Travis set him up, and then he wanted to fit in so badly, which happens sometimes to people with disabilities, that he went through with it anyway, and he didn't know what was going on in the first place. So I'm confused by this whole easy forgiveness thing. She told Archer that he hurt her. They had a period that was uncomfortable because he had hurt her, and then she talked to Travis, truly found out what happened, and then it was resolved. As soon as they confess their love for each other, they just only have sex. At one point, I started getting tired of it. Like, smut is great, but did they not have anything else to do other than just fucking? Is that it? It literally felt like even the author herself didn't believe that they were compatible, and the only chemistry she could write was sexual chemistry. Absolutely no emotional connection. And the romantic dialogue was so cheesy, even Hallmark would have rejected it. I'm confused by the no connection thing. They connected over their trauma and they had good conversation, and they continue to have good conversations even after working through their trauma. I'm confused. Also, yeah, I don't think we needed to learn about how much they had sex. I think it could have been something that had happened off the page, but people have sex a lot. Okay, like, look it up. It happens a lot. The amount of times that people think about having sex is a lot. So just look it up. Archer having no idea how sex worked or relationships worked. Do you really expect me to believe that? Also, on that note, him just leaving Bree, I just literally don't understand how you're supposed to root for these characters. Okay, this could just be me defending this book because I love it so much, but I could understand why Archer wouldn't know what sex was or how a relationship works, especially the relationship part, because his mom was not in a good relationship. It was a very abusive relationship, not how a relationship should work at all. And that was his only exposure to a relationship. So him not understanding how they work, that makes sense to me. The not understanding how sex works part, I can also understand, because sex is an uncomfortable topic for people to talk about these days. And so maybe his uncle didn't talk to him about it. And it's not like he can just go to the library and look it up, because that's a whole nother book genre that I don't even want to get into. And so it would make sense to me. The ending, how effing cliche. I'm all for cliches and tropey romances, but wow, no words for the miracle ending. I actually feel nauseous. I'm confused. I would chalk it up to good medicine, good doctors, surgeons, whoever, but it definitely was not a miracle. The guy got shot. He had surgery to fix whatever problems occurred because of him getting shot. I'm not a doctor, so I don't know. And then he was in a coma for a while. So, a miracle? I'm confused. I did think that him waking up because of a thunderclap and some lightning was a bit cliche, but I wouldn't call it a miracle ending. I would say that the town finally accepted him and it was a happy conclusion to the story, but you do you. The more I think about it, the more I can't let it go, and I feel like it needs to be said. The book shows inaccuracy of mental health, No trauma or PTSD goes away just because you sleep next to the right man. It would be cool if it were like that. All psychological problems would be so easily cured. Again, I refer you back to they still had to work through stuff, and it happened after she talked to him about it and processed it with him, and then we still had to talk about his insecurities and other things like that. That was just my take on it, but again, I don't know anything about PTSD. I only know some things about disability. My second problem, and I think this is my main problem with the book, is how Bree literally is taking advantage of Archer, and that gets romanticized. I'm going to refer you back to your first question. Are we reading the same book? On many occasions, it points to Archer being mentally underdeveloped in comparison to Bree, and that he is basically mentally still at the age of a child or teen. You can see that if you look at his fridge, if you listen to the way he behaves and communicates. Even the way Bree is trying to have sex with him, and he takes everything with a boyish wonder. This is not cute or, oh, she's teaching him. That is severe childhood trauma. And I don't think Bree is intentionally taking advantage of this, but she's doing it nevertheless. Okay, I know what this reviewer is referring to because it is mentioned that, we have to play 16 years of emotional catch-up and all these things, but I don't think she's taking advantage of it, and he's definitely not mentally underdeveloped. To me, when they were talking about playing 16 years of emotional catch-up, it was more that he hadn't had anybody to talk about his trauma with, and so he's now having to process that at a later date. It didn't seem to me like it was written to be that he is mentally challenged or affected in any way. His dialogue was at the same level as hers, and yes, there was a lack of understanding the world, but that would make sense with what occurred. The fact that he stayed at home for most of his young adult life because he was embarrassed and afraid to go out into town. The last part of this review, I don't think I can read on the internet without getting demonetized, but it is referring to the club scene and the fact that it was very frustrating to read, and I quote, wasn't high or drunk, and it was a little attracted to her. It then goes into further detail about what happened during that scene, and then says, and he could have left. Again, I'll refer you back to the beginning of my statement saying that he didn't understand what was going on at first, and when he did, he so desperately wanted to fit in that he was going to stay until he realized how wrong this was. The last thing that the reviewer said was that they considered the club scene to be him cheating on her. I do not consider it to be cheating because he was being manipulated. He wasn't doing this on purpose. Okay, going on to Murder at the Vicarage. I don't have any reviews to read from this. All I have is didn't like the plot, the characters, was too slow, and they didn't finish the book. Going on to the next book that I read this summer, and that was Travis, which is the sequel to Archer's Voice and focuses on his brother Travis and his whole redemption arc. And the two reviews that stood out to me was one that said, haven't read, I just don't like Travis. This one stood out to me because I also hated Travis from Archer's Voice, and I wasn't even sure I wanted to read this story, but when I saw the reviews on it, they were all talking about that it was such a great redemption arc, blah, blah, blah. And so I gave it a try, and I liked it, but I don't think I would ever reread the whole thing again. I might reread some of my favorite quotes and scenes, but I wouldn't reread the whole thing again. The other review that stood out to me said, I don't like it, and I don't know why I read it to begin with. I was interested in the beginning of the book, but it just got boring not long after that. He was such an unlikable character in the first book, and that's probably why I didn't care about his redemption story. He had so much self-pity combined with an inferiority complex, like, grow up, you're 32 years old, and also, this is an age gap. I just am getting tired of reading those at this point because it's everywhere. There was so much unnecessary internal dialogue. I found myself skipping through sections because nothing was really happening. Why is this book so well rated? Sadly, I hated it. I can't tolerate Travis. Grow some balls, man, and pretty please, stop whining all the damn time. The backstory was too dramatic for my taste. Overall, I was bored, like I rarely have been. Now, I know we all don't like Travis from the first book, but I can understand the backstory, and it makes sense to me because his dad died, and so he spent all of his childhood, as well as his young adulthood, with his mom, who all the time told him that his dad left him, that he didn't love him, and all these other things because she was so mad at his dad for leaving, and she put it on Travis. And so that backstory made sense to me because she was the only one that he really had contact with, because he then acted toward Arthur in such a way because of the way that his mom talked about Arthur and his dad, that it caused everything that happened in the first book and also in his childhood, causing him not to have much of a relationship with Arthur. And so that backstory made sense to me. This leads me to the comment that was made about his inferiority complex and that he should have grown out of it at the age of 32, because looking at the definition of inferiority by the New Oxford American Dictionary, it says, an unrealistic feeling of general inadequacy caused by actual or supposed inferiority in one sphere, sometimes marked by aggressive behavior and compensation. It makes sense to me that he would have an inferiority complex because his mom, again, kept telling him over and over again that his dad left him because he didn't love him and all these other things, which made him feel inadequate. And then he lashed out at Arthur. But again, it makes sense to me because of the way that his mom treated the situation with his dad and the things that she said to him. The next book was A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Now, I didn't like this book either. I didn't even finish it, as you all know, and so I have really nothing to go on than the other things that I've told you, but these two reviews that I pulled summarize my feelings. One says, Hank, a Yankee from early America, has found himself in the 6th century. He's now a pupil of King Arthur, a member for Britain, and he's challenged that time period's most magical and dangerous man, Merlin. However, with his superior knowledge and the sciences from his world, he is easily able to outstage and outsmart not only Merlin and all other challengers, but the kingdom itself. He starts small, wanting to add soap when bathing into the equation for cleaner and more sanitary persons. He moves to advancing the 6th century into the power and magic of a republic, hoping to take the country without blood and making all people free and equal. Along his adventures, he finds how simple-minded and superstitious these people are and plays to their weaknesses. If only they would listen to his amazing superiority and high intellect, then they could find the joy and peace that he has imagined for them. I found this book a quite difficult read. For someone who loves King Arthur tales and the medieval time period, this read was a horrible twist of the lifestyle and ways of a people. It made up Merlin, King Arthur, Lancelot, and all the people involved as mere simpletons that cared not for the world, the goings-on around them, and in particular, made them appear illogical and self-oppressed. The boss, as Hank became known and titled, thought only his way and ideas could be right, and therefore didn't care to listen to others' opinions or let things stay the way they were with others or the kingdom. The book was also boring at times, adding to my difficulty in getting through it, as I particularly did not like the main character, as I found him rude, close-minded, and particularly belittling of others. Mark Twain definitely knows how to skew a perspective, a classic story, and get a point across. That sums up all my thoughts, and I am very glad that I did not continue reading it. The second review said, I did not enjoy this book. I expected something funny, and instead I got an annoyingly arrogant white American thinking he is superior to everyone else and knows best. It may be possible that the annoying tone was amplified by the narration, although I thought it fit the character. Nevertheless, I listened to the latter half at a 2.0 speed, which I usually only reach when I want things to be over with, but I'm curious enough to finish instead of just DNFing. The final one says, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court is a train wreck of a novel that, if written today, would never have seen print. While notable for its innovation during its time and its 100,000 imitators, the narrative is rambling, one-sided, and frustrating. Yep, all the things that I caught within the first, 30% and didn't continue reading, and thank God I didn't, because the people who actually finished it have confirmed that I would probably feel the same things if I had continued. Fourth Wing. This was another 5-star read for me, as you may know. And, again, reading 1-star reviews of this was tough and a little bit comical to me. The overall feeling for this book was that it had too many tropes and plot lines from other books, didn't like the characters, the world building was forced, or people didn't like the writing style. Now, I mentioned this in my favorite quotes and scenes video for Fourth Wing, but yes, there are a lot of tropes that have come from other books, and it is quite obvious, and so I can understand why some people wouldn't like this book for that reason. The one that confused me, and that we'll get into later with some of the reviews, was that the world building seemed forced. I thought that it was actually very well done, because you learn about the world through the classes that she ends up taking in this war college, and so I thought it was a very well done way of world building. And I know we get some world building in the very beginning of the book that may seem forced to some people, but again, I thought it was really well done, because she's doing it as a way to calm her mind, because first and foremost, she is a scribe at the starting point of the story, and so for her to calm down and make it across the parapet, she has to recite facts. And to me, it also showed a good coping mechanism. There were a lot of things that this reviewer said, but these are the things that I pulled out of it that were, to me, the most important to address and talk about. Violet's character could have been made more interesting to me if we had seen her time as a scribe before she was forced to become a writer. See her actually train and get stronger. See how she generally fought through her chronic pain. See her deal with the grief of her brother. Explore the weird dynamic she has with her mother. See the friendships forming and the romance truly developing. See her effing bond with these dragons. I actually like that we didn't get to see her before she was a dragon rider, and that's something that has been floating around on the internet, is how Rebecca Yarros broke the rules of writing by not having the first stage where you're in the old world before you transition to the new one, and that's what made the book exciting, was that you jump straight into the action and straight into the new world. And I agree, I don't think I would have liked the story as much if we had seen her as a scribe first. Also, I have a feeling that we're still going to get that scribe feel as we move on through the story, because she is going back to the war college and she does still have friends, specifically Jezanina, that she's friends with in the scribe quadrant, and so I think we'll still get the scribe's perspective, just not with her being directly in the scribe quadrant. As for her training and getting stronger and actually being able to see that, I am a little confused as to where we're getting that from, because we did see that there were scenes where she trained with Imogen and Xaden and the rest of them and got stronger, and we kept seeing the challenges with other opponents from the wing that also helped her get stronger. But if you are a person that likes a lot of those training scenes, I can understand why you would want more. As to the third point that this reviewer made about seeing her actually fight through chronic illness and how to do that, or how she's doing that, I think we're going to explore that more in the books to follow, because she's going to be put in more of that war situation rather than just training and having healers constantly. She's going to be put into that battle situation more often, where she won't always have access to a healer. In terms of exploring this weird dynamic with her mother, this is definitely coming within the future books. And I have a feeling we're going to start in book 2, because the tagline for book 2 is "Burn It Down." And we know from the synopsis that was released that we are going back to the school. And we're getting a further look into the military structure. Specifically, it looks like the command structure, because we're now dealing with a vice commandant. And because we're going deeper into that structure, we're probably going to learn more about her mom. And I have a feeling burning it all down means going from the top down. So that means that we're going to be, again, going further into the command structure. And because we're going further into that command structure, we're going to be exploring more with her mom. These last two, seeing the friendships forming and the romance truly developing, as well as seeing her bond with her dragons. I agree that we could have seen more on the friendship front as well as the romance front, but like exploring the weird relationship that she has with her mom, I think those things will be coming in the later books. We have to remember that this is the first book of a 5-book series, and so things are going to be developing and building throughout the series, and we can't just have it all in the first book. The next review said, "Some of you are about to be mad at me, but this is if Sarah J. Maas and Allie Hazelwood had a baby. Also, if this is enemies to lovers, then oh, how the mighty have fallen. The amount of times I was cringing was insane. I'd rather stick molten hot needles in my eyes than read Squall." I disagree. I do agree that this book was multiple books combined. I did talk about that in my Goodreads review, as well as the video that I made about it. I thought it was, if Red Queen, Divergent, and A Court of Thorns and Roses had a baby, this would be it. And I purely put in A Court of Thorns and Roses because of the Dane dynamic, because I thought he was a lot like Tamlin. And I thought that the enemies to lovers, as well as everything else in this book, was really well done, because you would be mad at the person and be enemies with the person that had your parent killed. And no, it wasn't Violet directly, but it was her mom. And so for Xaden, those two things for a while there were synonymous. And because he couldn't get to the mom, he was gonna get to Violet. So that really made sense to me. I enjoyed reading the change. I enjoyed the banter between them, as you all know. Moving on to COVID-19, the greatest cover-up in history, from Wuhan to the White House. There were only 2 1-star ratings and no one left reviews, so I have nothing. The next one that I read was Good Omens. The overall feeling for this book was, it was bad, there was forced humor, we were bored, could have been edited down more. I pulled 2 reviews for this book, and the first one said, "Good Omens, quite frankly, needs to be edited. Halfway through the book, I could sum up what had occurred in 200 pages with a few sentences. The book really wanted to be a satire, but just wound up being a sort of soggy attempt at poking fun at something totally right for poking fun at, by only including a smattering of actual Revelations content. That said, the storytelling was maddeningly weak." I know nothing about the Bible, so I can't comment on this, but I do agree that the book could have been edited down, and it was only 220 pages. I feel like it could have been edited down to 120, so I agree. The second review for this book said, "This is hands down the worst book I've read this year. I guess Neil Gaiman is not for me. This is the second book by him that I've read and also disliked. I almost DNF'd this, but for reasons I can't even remember. I know that some of you love this book, and I don't fault you for it, but as for me, it sucks. I just love this quote because it's realistic. Hell is empty and all the devils are here. The humor was off 90% of the time, and it wasn't even funny. The plot is amazing, if only it was well depicted. The writing is just the worst thing in the book. It was disjointed and scattered. I've read books with more than 15 POVs that did a great job of it. In this, none of the characters have anything in common. I thought and hoped that a connection would come at the end, only to be disappointed. Just a few of the characters later met. I have no idea what to think of the characters. I neither hate nor like them. Aziraphale and Crowley isn't too bad. I just wish they had more backstory. I agree. This book could have been way better, and I think that the things that it was trying to communicate, the lessons that Crowley and Aziraphale were supposed to learn, were way better done in Lucifer, which, as I've mentioned before, Neil Gaiman had a hand in the comics for Lucifer, which then was turned into a show. And I think the show communicated what the book was trying to communicate way better, and these shows aren't even related. Good Omens has its own show, which is terrible, by the way. I didn't even finish it. But I think that Lucifer did a way better job of communicating these lessons that we were supposed to gain from Good Omens. The next book that I read was The Reluctant Empress, and I pulled 3 reviews for this because they all mystified me in terms of what they were talking about. I was very confused. The first one says, "This was more about Cece than I liked. The book barely focused on her husband or kids, but I guess Cece barely focused on those as well. This is a bit slow, and I gave a single star because this was written in the 80s, but the author still refers to Black people as Negroes or Black Moors outside of period quotes. It's dated and gross." I don't know what you're expecting when it's called The Reluctant Empress and is supposed to be focused on Cece. I don't know if you were expecting more about her political life or something, but I felt that it depicted her life quite accurately because, as you said, she barely focused on her family at all. And so because it was about her life, it would make sense that the family was also barely mentioned. And also there wasn't going to be a lot of politics in this because, again, she did not enjoy politics, and this was a book on her life. And so there wouldn't be a lot on politics. I did some looking, and this book was actually based on her diary entries, and therefore it would make sense for her to use words such as Negro and Black Moors, because a treaty to suppress slavery in Austria wasn't signed until 1841 and was called the Treaty of Suppression of the African Slave Trade, according to Wikipedia. Therefore, it would make sense she would still use that language since she didn't die until 1898. So even though this book was written by someone in the 80s and we had largely moved away from that language, if we're accurately portraying this person and we're using her diary entries, then those words are going to come up. Moving on to the next review that said, "I felt that this book was quite biased. Obviously, the emperor was depicted as deeply in love throughout his life, while the empress was nonchalant and running away from him. All of Sophie's diary entries are surprisingly positive with regards to reviews on Elizabeth. Not a single bad word. Well, it was obvious that there was a strong conflict between the emperor's mom and Elizabeth. I was even surprised at a negative remark regarding Elizabeth's poems, saying that they were ridiculous rhymes or something of the sort. I would have liked a more fair account of what truly happened in this politically powerful family. It made me question, much like Princess Diana, what truly led to the death of the Empress. Will we ever know? This is a courageous question to ask." I had a hard time reading this review just because I didn't think that this book was biased. I thought it was very well done. It was very clearly stated that we are pulling from Elizabeth's diary entries and not just making this up. Now, we are commenting on her diary entries, but the source material remains the same. Also, it has been well documented what Elizabeth's relationship with Franz's mother was like, and also how she died. And lastly, the third one says, "The writing style is weirdly off-putting and comes across like it was written by a high school girl. It has a tendency to zoom ahead in a hyperactive way instead of developing its points properly." This makes sense to me because we are pulling the source material from Elizabeth's diaries, and she was a high school girl. She was 16. And so because we're pulling from the diary entries, it makes sense that the writing might be a bit scattered. The second to last book I read this summer was Seventh Son. And I don't have any reviews for this, just that overall it was boring and people were confused as to what was going on. Yeah, me too. I was confused as to what was going on. I also found the names to be very weird. Like, we literally named Measure. Why? I don't know. Editing Jada here. There was one book that I forgot to add, and that was The Unflattening. And this was someone's doctoral thesis. And overall, the reviews for this book were that it was pretentious, boring, and also one person said that it read like a manifesto. There was one review that stood out to me, and this reviewer said, "The sleepwalking figures themselves reference the board from Star Trek, shrink-wrapped stone or plaster statues. Denise Fanning's Detroit installation of plaster figures comes to mind. Munch's Scream, Kath Cowlitt's anguished figures, though I never let mine be anywhere near as expensive. Gia Comet's almost alien figures, and Death from the Seventh Seal, page 157. There's another page and a half of that, by the way, all to be described, a penciled image that looks torn from a crude M.C. Escher study, if Escher had drawn people to look as featureless and fixed as the Oscar statuette." In short, this reviewer is saying that they think the author took too many references from pop culture, whether that be film, history, or philosophers, and tried to pass it off as his own work. However, I think it did the complete opposite. I think it lended more meaning to his work and more interest and helped engage people because they saw a pop culture reference that drew them in and helped them understand the concept. The last book that I read this summer was IceBreaker by Hannah Grace, and overall people said dragged on for a long time. 3 of the people didn't even finish it, and one person, and several others too, did not like the characters. One person said, to sum all that up again, there were too many characters, too much drama, and somehow there was nothing actually going on other than people hanging out a bunch and Anastasia getting it on with me every time she was drunk and horny. I disagree, but I can understand where that would come in, especially if you didn't make it past the 42% mark, because I think up until that point, that was all that was going on. So that makes sense. One person said, cringy relationship is too fast-paced. I disagree. I think that the relationship was kind of cringy until the 42% mark, and then we got into deeper content, and it got better from there. I really, really enjoyed the relationship development, and God, please help me. I need someone like Nate. He is so understanding and supportive, and I need someone like him, okay? That's all I'm saying. Also, I don't think it was too fast-paced because yes, they did become boyfriend and girlfriend in 3 months or whatever, but then the other things that happened within the relationship, like them getting engaged and having a kid, happened 2 years later. So I didn't think it was too fast-paced. The last review had 2 quotes from when Nate's friends had that intervention with him and made him confront why he was having such a problem with Anastasia moving back in with Aaron, her skating partner, and they said, "You think he's going to manipulate her into forgiving him, and then she won't need you anymore. You like being needed by her. It makes you feel important. You know Aaron hates you, and you think he's going to keep her away from you, which just shows you don't know how strong she is or truly understand how much she loves you." And that's some people's love language, acts of service. And so they need to be able to do something in order to show that they love the person. And those are very valid concerns for me, from my perspective, because Aaron has done all these things in the past. And so why wouldn't he do them again? This next quote says, "I shouldn't have to scream that I'm not naive or being manipulated for Nathan to trust my judgment. I shouldn't have to beg him to understand that there is a difference between friendship and partnership." And this was Anastasia's frustration with Nate for the way that he was acting, but they eventually worked through them and had this conversation about what he was feeling, what she was feeling, and worked through it, which I really enjoyed, because in a relationship, you're going to have conflicts like this, and you're not going to resolve them right away. But if you have a good relationship, you will eventually resolve them and talk about them. The reviewer went on to say, these quotes single-handedly ruined the book for me and made me hate Nathan. Nathan desperately needs therapy. I'm surprised she put up with the attitude that he showed her. I wanted him to be able to work out his feelings on his own, so she would never have to put up with a man who cannot communicate his feelings, because communication is key. Instead, they got pissed at each other and would put off arguments, then they don't see each other for a few days and everything is fixed. I do appreciate the boys knocking some sense into him. I don't know what the reviewer missed here, because that's not what I got at all. I do understand that, sometimes they didn't talk, and Nathan did need to confront these things, and his friends helped him through that. But they also talked through their issues. I don't know where we got that they didn't talk at all. And he did communicate his feelings. I don't know. I'm just a bit mystified. Anyway, those were all the books that I read this summer, and it was really fun for me to go through and read 1-star reviews of all of those books and talk about my feelings and opinions on them, because while I disagreed with most of them, some of them I agreed with, and it's always interesting to me to see a different side, even if I do disagree. I hope you enjoyed. Until next time.